At the Lexington Terrace, a luxury restaurant known for its elite clientele, one waiter's blatant disrespect for a casually dressed man would soon be exposed, leaving the entire room stunned by his true identity. The sound of quiet conversations and the clinking of wine glasses filled the air in the luxurious dining room of the Grand Oak, one of the most prestigious eateries in downtown Riverside. The atmosphere exuded a refined elegance. Patrons dressed in their finest clothes, gold watches shimmering under soft lighting, and the warm aroma of freshly baked bread drifting across the room. In this place, appearances meant everything. As the evening unfolded, a man named Marcus Evans walked through the sleek glass doors. At 40, he was a successful entrepreneur in the tech world, having recently signed a lucrative contract that would secure his place among the industry's elites. Yet, dressed in a simple black hoodie, well-worn jeans, and a pair of sneakers that had clearly seen better days, Marcus didn't fit the typical mold of the restaurant's clientele. He wasn't here to impress anyone. Instead, he sought a quiet night to enjoy his success and indulge in the renowned cuisine. He glanced around the room as he made his way past the polished oak tables and flickering candlelight. Marcus was here for the food, not the show. He casually adjusted his modest wristwatch, nowhere near the lavish brands that adorned the wrists of the other diners, and approached the hostess stand with an easy smile. The hostess, a young woman with a neat ponytail, gave him a warm greeting before checking the reservation list. "Ah, Mr. Evans, right this way," she said, guiding him toward a secluded booth by the window, one of the most coveted seats in the restaurant. As Marcus sat down, the quiet buzz of the place seemed to settle around him. For the first time in a long while, he could simply relax and reflect on the whirlwind of recent achievements. But then, a tall figure approached the table. "Good evening," said a man in a sharp black shirt and a red bow tie, his voice crisp and somewhat disapproving. The waiter's name tag read Blake. He was slender and moved with a certain arrogance, which made Marcus straighten in his seat. "Water to start?" Blake asked, his words clipped. "Just still, thanks," Marcus replied, his tone calm and unbothered. Blake nodded, but there was a subtle sneer that crossed his face, just for a moment, before he turned and left without another word. Marcus shrugged it off, thinking it was just a brief encounter, but something felt off. He focused back on the menu, amused by how much some of the prices seemed to ask for a simple plate of vegetables. When Blake returned with the water, his presence was cold, and he placed the glass down with a little more force than necessary, making a small splash. "Ready to order?" he asked, his voice sharper now. "Not yet," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. "I'll need a few more minutes." Blake's smile, if it could be called that, was barely noticeable. "Take your time," he said with a sarcastic edge, walking away. Marcus could feel the tension. He wasn't here to create drama, but the waiter's treatment felt intentionally dismissive. As Blake moved from table to table, Marcus observed how easily he engaged with the other guests, offering kind smiles and light chatter. But when he returned to Marcus, his demeanor had turned noticeably colder. "Have you made your choice?" Blake asked, as if Marcus was holding him up. "I'll go with the filet mignon," Marcus said, his voice neutral. "Medium rare, with the mashed potatoes." Blake scribbled the order, barely looking up. "Anything else?" "A glass of red, please," Marcus added. Blake sighed, the sound barely audible, before turning and walking away without a word. The bread basket arrived with no fanfare. Blake dropped it on the table so carelessly that it nearly toppled Marcus's glass. "Here," he muttered, before turning to attend to another table. Marcus had dealt with this kind of treatment before. The microaggressions, the unspoken judgment. He'd spent years navigating rooms where people underestimated him, thinking he didn't belong. But tonight, the sting of it was hard to ignore. "Is everything okay, sir?" a voice asked, breaking through Marcus's growing irritation. He looked up to see the hostess again, her expression warm and concerned. "Yes, everything's fine," Marcus said with a forced smile. He didn't want to make a scene, but the discomfort was palpable now. He wasn't the only one who noticed. An elderly man sitting nearby threw him a sympathetic glance, as if he recognized what was happening. When Blake returned with the steak, his actions seemed deliberate in their thoughtlessness. The plate hit the table with a thud, and when he poured the wine, A few drops spilled onto the pristine tablecloth. "Thanks," Marcus said, his voice calm but strained. Blake didn't answer. He simply gave a curt nod and walked away. The steak was perfect, cooked to the exact specifications. But the ambience was heavy, suffused with a discomfort that seemed to grow with every passing minute. Marcus noticed the glances from other diners, some of which were filled with pity or curiosity. One couple even whispered to each other, their voices too low for Marcus to hear, but loud enough for him to sense the judgment in their words. And then, Marcus decided he couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't the first time he'd been treated this way, but tonight it felt different. He was tired of letting it slide. As Blake passed by once more, balancing several plates on his arm, Marcus raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but composed. Blake stopped, his face unreadable. "Yes?" he asked. "There's wine on the tablecloth," Marcus pointed out, gesturing to the dark stain near his plate. "Could you get something to clean that up?" Blake glanced at the stain, then shrugged. "It's nothing. I'll get someone to clean it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That someone wouldn't be you?" "I'm busy," Blake said coldly before turning away. A few patrons at nearby tables exchanged looks, some with disapproving frowns. Marcus couldn't care less about their pity. His patience was running thin, but he wasn't about to let it ruin his night. Minutes passed, and still, no one came to clean the table or check on him. It was as though he had become invisible. Blake continued to attend to every other table, laughing and joking with guests, showering them with the kind of attentiveness that Marcus knew was reserved for the regulars, those who fit the expected mold. Marcus let out a quiet sigh, watching Blake's exaggerated laughs echo through the room. It wasn't the first time he'd been treated differently based on assumptions about who he was, but tonight, something inside him shifted. He wasn't going to stand for it anymore. A manager appeared, clipboard in hand, and Marcus considered flagging him down. But instead, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "Unbelievable service tonight at the Grand Oak." The reply came quickly. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't leave." A faint smile tugged at Marcus's lips as he set his phone down. He wasn't sure if the manager could do anything, but he was willing to find out. When Blake returned, his tone was as indifferent as ever. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus said, locking eyes with him for the first time that night. "I'd like to check." Blake nodded curtly and disappeared again. A moment later, Blake returned with a small leather folder and placed it on the table. Marcus opened it, his eyes immediately falling on a note scribbled at the bottom of the bill. "Please be aware of the dress code. Business casual required." Marcus stared at the words, his jaw tightening. This wasn't about a dress code. It was about something far more subtle. Before he could react, the manager approached, flanked by a familiar face, a former business associate of his. The manager's expression shifted when he saw Marcus sitting at the table. "Mr. Evans," the manager said, his tone respectful, "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. We've just received word of the issue with your service." Marcus glanced over at Blake, who was standing a few feet away, visibly tense. "Well," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, "it's been an interesting evening." The manager turned to Blake, and without a word, Blake swiftly walked away, his back stiff and his eyes cast down. "I deeply apologize, Mr. Evans," the manager continued, turning back to Marcus. "Your meal will be complimentary tonight as a gesture of our commitment to service." Marcus smiled tightly. "Thank you, but I'll be paying. I don't need charity." The manager nodded quickly, recovering his composure. "Of course, Mr. Evans. We'll ensure everything is settled." Marcus rose from the table, ready to leave. As he reached the door, he heard the murmurs of the other patrons, their conversations halting as they realized who they had just mistreated. The cool night air of Riverside greeted him as he stepped outside, the city's bustling streets a stark contrast to the tension that had hung over him inside. But as Marcus walked down the sidewalk, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just about the meal. It was a reminder that respect, true respect, was never about how you dressed or where you sat. It was about seeing the person in front of you and honoring them for who they truly were.